if we date Jewish history, let's say back to the days of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the period of the Bible, so Jewish history, you could say, starting with Israelite period, is 3,500 years old. Out of 3,500 years, 2,500 years, we have been a diaspora nation. Now, what does that mean? A diaspora is the Greek word which means the communities dispersed of a given nation. So you could say there is, for instance, there is an Armenian diaspora. A lot of Armenians live in California and in Boston. There is a land of Armenia, but there are Armenians not living in Armenia. They consider themselves Armenians. There also may be citizens of this country. There is a diaspora of millions of Chinese who don't live in China and still consider themselves Chinese. But there is a homeland of China. It's a vast country. There are diasporas of various kinds, but the Jewish diaspora is different in that for most of our history, we have been a diaspora nation with a very small population in the Jewish homeland in the land of Israel. And this was the result of the course of history, which I will clarify now. When we read the Bible, the story of the land of Israel, the kingdom of Judah, two neighboring kingdoms, same religion, same language, same culture, same ancestry and traditions, but politically divided. After the death of Solomon, there was a rebellion. Northern Israel became independent. Southern Israel remained as Judah. These two states, then, are neighbors for 200 years, from 922 to 722, 721. And during this period, they are at times they're enemies, at times they're friends, at times they're allies. It's an interesting history. It's all recorded in the book of Kings in the Bible. The Assyrian Empire, when it started its march to world domination in 745, from 745 to 648, for 100 years, the Assyrians were always on the warpath trying to dominate the world. And they caused a lot of destruction, which they describe with pride. The number of people they killed and all of that, it's all recorded in the Assyrian records. Now in 721 BC, they conquered the city of Samaria, the capital of northern Israel, and they deported most of the people of Samaria who were what we might call the potential political leadership. Well, let's say the king of Israel and his cabinet and the generals and the educated people. These people were taken captive, and they give the number, something like 21,563 were taken captive from Samaria. And the biblical record tells us, in the book of 2 Kings chapter 17, they were taken and they were deported to a great distance into Central Asia and settled in the lands of what are now Afghanistan and Armenia and Iran, out of the land of Israel. The Assyrian record says the same thing. And I deported these captives too, and then he lists the lands, and it's the same thing. So the northern Israel was politically destroyed, a large part of its population deported into foreign lands, and we don't hear anything about them later on. But that doesn't mean that they disappeared, but they are the basis of a legend. A legend, by the way, which is purely fictional. The 10 lost tribes, that legend, which plays an interesting role in history. But there were not 10 lost tribes that were sold or lost. These were remnants of the kingdom of Israel that no longer existed as a political entity, but his peoples were scattered. And later on we'll see how they were ultimately reincorporated into the Jewish people. Now, so that was an exile community. Then in 597 BC, Syrian Empire is already gone, and now the Babylonian Empire is conquered, and the Babylonian Empire came to Israel, or to the land of Judah, and besieged the city of Jerusalem, and got the surrender in 597 BC, and as a result of that surrender, the Babylonian Emperor Nebuchadnezzar appointed a member of the royal family to be king over Judah, with a treaty saying, I will be loyal to the Babylonian emperor, signed by Zedekiah. And then he took the rest of the royal family And he took other people who are, you might say, nobility, and took them to Babylon as hostages or captives. Because they were the elements of the society that knew how to run a state and to organize a state, and they were brought en bloc to Babylon, and there they were settled. They were not scattered, they were simply brought to Babylon. And then, remarkably, the emperor kind of neglected them, as if to say, don't go back to the land of Judah, but I'm not going to bother you. They organized themselves into a well-regulated community of about 30,000, you might say. Now, in 586, 11 years later, Nebuchadnezzar returned, and this time he's going to punish the king because he tried to rebel. So in 586 BC, that's the destruction of the first temple. In 586 BC, Jerusalem was destroyed, the temple was burned, a large number of Jerusalemites were taken captive, and now we could say that in Babylon there was a population of about 60,000 Jews. Don't make the mistake, which many people do. The Babylonian captivity, people will say, or they think the Babylonian captivity meant all the Jews of Israel were taken to Babylon. That's not what happened. I mean, when we read the biblical text, we'll see that's not what happened. He took the leadership and brought them to Babylon, including the royal family. Then he appointed a Jew to be governor of Judea, because you have to have somebody to organize even the destruction. So this man, Gedaliah ben Achikam, was appointed governor, and he was governing Judea, and he remained governor for about 2 days, because there were still rebels. So he called a meeting of the cabinet, and they killed him on the spot. Meaning what? They said, we will never submit to Babylonian authority. What did they do then? Then they ran away to Egypt. But Israel was left rather devastated. But the people were still there, farmers, carpenters, people who were not leadership. The leadership was in Babylon. And then what happened to these 60,000 Jews in Babylon? They organized themselves, and not only did they organize themselves as a self-regulated community, because the Babylonians treated them with benign neglect. But not only that, they had symbols. They had the king of Israel, who had sat on the throne in Jerusalem, and he became king of the Jewish community. So they had the structure of government, and they had the intellectual elite, and they had the judges and those who knew the law, and so they organized the Jewish community in Babylonia. That community, you could say, was the first established diaspora community, namely a community of Jews living and thriving outside the land of Israel.